Good evening. I'm Eric Paulk, Deputy Director at Georgia Equality, and I'm happy to be here this evening with some really special guests, some of our past and current board members. Georgia Equality celebrated its 25th anniversary last year during the middle of a global pandemic and during a year that caused us to reconsider what justice, equity, and equality look like. So we thought this would be a good time for us to take a look at ourselves and at the LGBTQ landscape through the eyes of some of our former and current board leadership and to discuss Georgia Equality's role in movement building as we implement a new strategic plan. With that, I'll have each of our panelists introduce themselves with their names, pronouns, role, and what years they were members of our Georgia Equality Board. So we will start with Kenyatta.
Hi, Kenyatta Mitchell. She, her, hers. I started with Georgia Equality back in the antiquities. So I've been here since the very beginning. I think it's been like 10 or 12 years. I can't remember exactly how long. And I forget the last question. What was the last thing I have to say?
What's your role on the board?
Oh, role on the board. So I am chair of the C4 board, which is the easiest way to say it is the political board. So I'm a registered lobbyist by trade. So I do the lobbyist work here.
Cool. Thank you, Kenyatta. Ronald.
Yeah, so Ronald Moore, he, him, his, and I'm a former board member. I live now, retired, live in Detroit, my hometown, Detroit. I was on the board before Jeff Graham was executive director. So I'm trying to think of the exact year. It had to be like 97, 98, something like that. I moved to Atlanta in 95, right before the Olympics. And within a year or two, I was on the Georgia Equality Board. And I was chair of the C4 board for a while. But we met together back then. So it was in the late 90s that I was involved with Georgia Equality. I was in Atlanta for 12 years.
Okay, so Ronald, we're gonna have a good time then talking to you about how Georgia Equality has grown and
Oh,
changed
yeah,
since then. So
sure.
looking forward to that. DeAndre.
Good evening. I am Dr. DeAndre S. Pickett. I serve as the C3 board chair, he, him, his. And like Kenyatta, the best way to describe what we do at C3 is everything that Kenyatta does not do. That's what we do, right? Um, so we handle a lot of the work as far as staff and things of nature that happens on our end in our area. And so I have been on the board since 2018. So I am the baby. I kind of went straight from board member to officer. So that's kind of how Georgia Equality does you really quickly. But it's been a joy and a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and learning from both Ronald and Kenyatta about where we've been, and I'm looking forward to talk about where we're going.
Well, perfect. So I'll hop right in then. So Ronald, we'll start with you. So Ronald, can you talk a little bit about um, the LGBTQ landscape when you first joined the board of Georgia Equality? What were some of the challenges, and how was Georgia Equality helping to mitigate some of those challenges?
Sure. The LGBTQ community, now we will call it, mirrors the overall community. So there was one world north of Midtown and one world south of Midtown. And very much racially segregated. Now, Georgia Equality was a very small, local focused organization, not considered to be a powerhouse in any way. The power then was in the national organizations. So whether it was HRC, GLSEN, Victory Fund, Georgia, Atlanta was known as a place where the organization could come and get money. The people in Atlanta wrote checks. There was no expectation that there could be any local progress or local movement. But it was seen, we were sort of like the cash cow for the national organization. And Georgia Equality, because nobody had any hope of anything really happening down under the dome, Georgia Equality was not viewed as something that was really capable of changing things. I'll tell you, a big change came when Carla Drenner was elected to the legislature. When the fact that an openly gay person, lesbian in that case, could be a representative. That started to open people's eyes. And Alan Thornell was another powerhouse. Who was the late Alan Thornell. He ran for the legislature 2 or 3 times and so forth. And that's when people started thinking locally. And I just want to give a shout out and memory to a very good friend and somebody who I talked a lot to, and that was Philip Rush. Philip Rush he was not a building. he was a full-fledged person, and him and I talked about the racial issues a lot. He was very much in tune to that, because the LGBTQ community and the Black community were in two different worlds. You had Marianne and Zami on that side. There was not a viable gay men's organization. There used to be a group called First Sunday or First Two, something like that, but they were gone by then. So I of course, no surprise, I had a foot in both worlds. So Georgia Equality and the other LGBT groups I was involved in, but then for my own cultural recharging the battery, Marianne and others, I was a big supporter of Zambia and the scholarships and so forth. But Georgia Equality was just considered a local-based organization. And really and Jeff was the one that changed it. I was on the committee when we hired Jeff, and Jeff is what really was the catalyst for it really going to a whole new level.
Yeah, Ronald, that's really, interesting. I know for, a lot of Black gay men, I know even for myself, Atlanta had always been like the destination, to be, kind of this like land of milk and honey if you were Black and gay. And so it was really interesting to hear that, that while, there was such really a vibrant Black gay constituency here, that there wasn't necessarily a place to necessarily plug in. And so, that's really interesting to hear. And interesting to hear that, as we sort of like think about building political power, what do those things sort of mean? So thank you for that, Ronald. So I'm gonna toss it to DeAndre then just for a second. So Donald talked a little bit about Ronald talked a little bit about where the LGBTQ movement was over a decade ago. Can you talk about what it looks like today? How are things different, and how do you think that things are the same, DeAndre?
I do think that when you look at the landscape of where we are currently, there has been a vast difference. I would definitely say, as pertains to really seeing more younger demographics and the young individuals engaged in a lot of the processes, really finding their voice and really understanding what it means to really push the envelope, if you will. And we've seen a lot of them really become more engaged in the political process. Even for myself, it was so funny into realizing that even when I ran back in 2017 for the state house, and I was literally inches away from becoming the first one elected, first Black gay men elected to the state house, that was kind of interesting to me. And we're still not there, because we still technically haven't had one elected. We've had one serve, but they weren't elected. That's a wink, wink, by the way. But it's so interesting that we're seeing a lot of firsts, and we're seeing a lot of young people engage. When you think about, the park cannons who are really pushing the envelope, when you think about the Antonio Browns on the city council who are pushing the envelopes, when you think about a lot of individuals who are really finding their voice, and then just being, activists under the gold dome and really finding their voice, right? As Ronald was saying, we were kind of local, but now you're really seeing us expand ourselves on this platform, right? We're really pushing that envelope and really making our voices heard. But on the flip side of that, there still is some of those same things to where we still have a ways to go when it comes to inclusivity and kind of getting ourselves to that table and finding where that niche is. Because again, we still, a lot of, even though we are as African Americans are making strides, we're still not always at the tables that we need to be. In some regards. And so I do see a lot of progress, I see a lot of change, but we still have a ways to go. before we really began to push that envelope. And I think Georgia Equality is, I think, setting the tone and also being the catalyst to kind of make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that you say, you know, some of the things that you just unpacked, DeAndre, when we sort of look at, what happened last year with the racial, unrest. So many of the folks who were out there in protests, um, even as we think about the things that are happening around voter suppression, so many of those folks are young, Black, and queer identified. And so, what we are really starting to see is um, a groundswell of, folks who identify as LGBTQ really seeing their space in movement building and in creating political power. And I think even more interesting is just around, the fact that this is happening outside of what we would consider normal LGBTQ specific sort of issues. And so yeah, something that's really interesting for us to look and think about right now. Um, so Kenyatta, I know you said that you've been a long serving board member of Georgia Equality. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen the organization grow, and how do we meet new challenges?
The growth of the organization has been just phenomenal. So when I first started, it was a pretty heterogeneous group of people. It was predominantly white male. I was the only Black member on the board for a long time. But I was elected chair, so that, so I wasn't I wasn't looked down because of that. But it's just very interesting how Georgia Equality has gone from a largely Metro Atlanta organization as well, with a lot of folks who were, you could draw a little circle around Atlanta. It was like, Decatur, Midtown, downtown Atlanta, and that's kind of like where we all live. But now that the organization is much, much more statewide, much more inclusive of trans folks, gender nonconforming folks, much more inclusive of different ethnicities. I'm not the only Black person on the board. I see you, DeAndre. There's a bunch more of us. There's 2 Black chairs, which is phenomenal. I mean, just the growth and diversity of the reach of this organization has been unparalleled from where it was, I think, 12 years ago. Some of the challenges that we have right now is really helping people, particularly straight people, understand that the fight is still ongoing. I can't tell you how many times I have conversations with my friends and they say, well, they can get married now, or they can serve in the military. And that's nice. It's great. It's phenomenal. Those are baby steps. Folks can still get fired. We still have a huge issue of LGBTQ youth who are homeless and who have been, pushed out in the streets. AIDS, HIV is still an issue. I mean, we're talking about, I always kind of laugh when people talk about our pandemic, like this is a new thing, right? I was like, well, I remember when I was in high school volunteering at a hospital, and every 4th person who came into the emergency room had full-blown AIDS. And, we were just helping people kind of get through. So I always laugh when people talk about the current pandemic as the only pandemic. This is the only pandemic that everyone's experienced in the same way. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of pushing to do. I just don't want people to rest on their laurels. People are, we have 2 great new senators here in Georgia. We have great new representatives. I mean, you got Nikema Williams giving us shout outs from the floor of the House. I mean, things we never thought we would get here in Georgia, and people from around the state and around the country can't get over the fact that Georgia seems so progressive, although we know Rashad Taylor was state rep. We know that Simone Bell was the first out Black female lesbian elected in the country. We know we hit all these benchmarks, but it wasn't until just now that people are seeing Georgia kind of where it always has been. It's always been a place where folks can come. It's been, it's never been easy. I'll never underestimate how hard it's been. But, in comparison to a lot of the country, we're in a pretty good spot. We're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I like that you said, Kenyatta, is the change doesn't happen quickly, and so much of this is one about being intentional and then working towards what that goal is. And so I know that Georgia Equality as an organization has been very intentional about a number of fights that we're finally starting to see some of that good work pay off. And so I think there's something about being very intentional in your values, and always sticking beside them and working towards that goal. So,
Actually, if I
oh,
can
go
add
ahead,
one more
Kenyatta.
point. So the other point I'd like to make is that the biggest change that has happened in my tenure on the board has gone from people using LGBT issues against us. So people would get unelected, people would get fired from their jobs in the state house, get fired from their jobs in city councils and county commissions for standing up and advocating for our issues. And now on both sides, Republican and Democratic sides, people are able to obtain their jobs, are able to get elected because of where they stand on LGBT issues. That has been the number one biggest change. I have people stop me in the hallway of the Capitol and say, hey, I want Georgia Equality's endorsement. Argue with me that they need Georgia Equality's endorsement. I used to beg people to get Georgia Equality's endorsement. I cannot tell you, I had a sore on my ear from being on the phone, calling people, begging them, like, no, you need to turn it in. Your district is 10% gay. You got to do it. I know they'll, vote for you, blah, 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 and nothing. And now they have people chasing me down the state house, and especially city councils. I mean, I can't tell you how many city council members have not talked to me because we didn't endorse them.
Yeah.
So that is a 360 change. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I mean, Kenyatta, that's across the state, and I think
Yeah.
again that goes back to some of the intentional work with the board. And so being very intentional about making sure there's geographic diversity on the board. The board now represents every corner of the state. And so I think that when you have that diversity, whether it be geographically, racially, gender, it all ends up, kind of coming together in the way that
Right.
it needs to. So DeAndre is gonna kind of piggyback on some of this that we're talking about now. Um, we recently implemented a new 3-year strategic plan. So DeAndre, can you talk a little bit about the significance leading up to the development of the strategic plan, and the implementation of it?
I always laugh because I get all the professional questions all the time, right?
Right.
I get always the professional questions, so I have to
It's
put on the
because you're
professional.
your doctor.
I got to put on the professional doctor voice really quickly.
Yeah.
But no, one of the things I will say about the strategic plan, I think Kenyatta would agree with this, is we were very intentional with this strategic plan. We knew very clearly that we were coming off the precipice of literally pandemic and social injustice across the nation. Not and even more in Georgia, we saw the Ahmaud Arbery issues that we've experienced here. We saw Rashad Brooks, and we literally saw all these things happening within our own communities. And of course, it expanded across the nation. And one of the things that we also were coming off of the cuff of was we were celebrating our 25th anniversary. And as we began to look at this conversation about where have we been as an organization, right? Where has Georgia Equality stood in the gap for the last 25 years? What do we want to be remembered for? And where do we want to be remembered doing the next 25 years? And as we began to analyze and look at the branding aspect of everything and started looking at how we were perceived, meaning that we also were not oblivious to the fact that, as Kenyatta said, there have been many, we were at one point in time pretty much an all-white male board, and that was the thing. And we don't shy away from knowing that. For some time there were inadequacies within our own board, and we're very clear. And that's something that Georgia Equality, I've appreciated, that we've sat down and said, listen, we get it. We know that this is this, but that's not where we are. The fact of the matter is we have really spun ourselves almost, I won't even say 360, we're almost 720, because of the fact that we have made whirlwinds by being more inclusive of what we believe in, not necessarily dealing with, we've been very clear to stay away from tokenism, but be more so around finding people who have a collective interest in making sure that we have one common goal, and that's being a spokesperson and a mouthpiece for social justice, right? So we have done things this has been I think the most diverse board I've heard of in a very, 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 I think, and I won't say a long time, just ever, right? We have had two individuals we've had a number of African American individuals on our board. We've had two trans women on our board. We just recently had Latinx. We have non-binary. So we literally have an array of individuals who identify across the board. And as Kenyatta has said, we are across the state of Georgia. And that has been something that we've been very consistent with, making sure that that everyone is represented. And so that's the work that went into the strategic plan. Even more so that we were intentional about the organization and the group who would help us through this strategic plan. And I was excited to know that after we vetted all of them and Eric was on that team, after it was all said and done, we chose a Black company, two Black strong women who are running a wonderful organization to help us through our strategic plan. And through that process, we were also told about how our work has changed their life, one in particular, on how she's able to identify more with her son and how she's able to understand him and understand his life and be able to progress with him. And so even through our own process, we've helped others help us in our process, right? And so this strategic plan is very geared and centered around racial equity and making sure that we understand not only what that means, but how to engage with it, how to operate with it, and not use it, again, as a token, but use it for a ground to grow us for the next 25 years. Because at the end of the day, we want to be known for who we were and what we've done, not be chastised and characterized because we didn't make the conscious effort to do it right. And I think you will see, as you begin to see us operate through the strategic plan, the work was beneficial, was hard. Let's be clear, because we had some difficult conversations. And I think that made it even more authentic, that we were able to come together and have these difficult conversations. But these are conversations that are being had, in other areas, right? And we were not immune to it. Just because we are an organization, because there's those of us who are part of this community who don't always agree and understand each other within this community. And we have differences even on terminology and issues. We talked about that and hashed about that. But I think that's what makes us great. And that's what makes us unique. And that's what's going to propel us to where we're going in the next 25 years, because we are very intentional about the work we're trying to do.
Thank you, DeAndre.
If I can say something, what I hear DeAndre, is that there's an acknowledgement now about how systemic racism is and the challenges that were back in the 90s. I don't think not enough people acknowledge the intersection of race and LGBTQ issues. It was sort of viewed as a separate thing. And so, for example, I was on the board of Project Open Hand, and as AIDS was managed differently in Buckhead, then it was no longer considered the issue. You mentioned about the pandemic before, but it was still rampant, on Southwest Atlanta, and in our community. So, but that was viewed as a separate thing then. The other part I would say is that also back then, the power structure of the gay community was really through corporations.
Yeah.
And so those, I was with Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard had a big footprint at the time, and that's what opened doors for me. But Austin and Bird, IBM, but it wasn't recognized. The systemic racism in those organizations kept people of color from being at the table.
Right.
And so when you say, oh, you're this company, that company, you're automatically putting a lot of us out. And Georgia Equality was a little different because it was more of a grassroots organization than some of the other national LGBT organizations, because the way we were kept out was to give or get. If you didn't have the money to pay your give or get, then there wasn't a seat for you on the board. And either your company paid for it or you paid for it. But that was really, looking back on it, that was really something that was exclusive instead of inclusive.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. Uh, we will say that we are dropping the strategic plan into the chat. So we invite folks to check that out. And it'll also be on our website. So we invite you to take a look at that as well. And so, Kenyatta, I have two questions for you. So the first question, and the first one is easy. And, DeAndre talked about intentionality and, especially around this new strategic plan. But you were there several years ago when we started work on racial equity, specifically with the board. And so, can you talk a little bit about that, Kenyatta?
So it's interesting because when we talk about racial equity, we always like to be very clear that it is a long line, right? So we're talking about our Latinx folks, we're talking about our Indigenous Americans, we're talking about the AAIP people, we're talking about everybody, right? So I know we've said a few times we're talking about more Black-white correspondence, but that has never been our intention or goal. We've always been very hyper inclusive of every type of being that lives in Georgia, right? But to say that our previous strategic plans were very interesting because they were a little bit less inclusive. They were both less racially inclusive, not in a bad way. It was just that it was a different time. We were trying so desperately not to be attacked and to live in our own world, that it was hard to look around and see, how do I reach out to the Anti-Defamation League to make sure that hate crimes deal with everyone? Or how do I go and look out for Planned Parenthood to make sure, that women have autonomy over their bodies? We weren't necessarily doing that outreach at the time because we were trying to make sure that we weren't attacked. And conversely, a lot of the other groups didn't want us to reach out to them because then they'd be saddled with dealing with the LGBT issues. So we are where we are right now because we can be. We have the privilege at this point for organizations to look at us as a beacon to be able to help them. And conversely, we're not so beaten up at this point that we could look around us and start pulling more people into the fold. So I hope that answers your question, Eric, but that's kind of where we are.
Well, thank you, Kenyatta. And then the second part of my question was really just about allyship and the importance of allyship in the LGBTQ movement space, and what that looks like. I mean, for me, Kenyatta, you are like, you exemplify what allyship looks like. But talk to the people about allyship.
So my grandmother used to always tell me this, and I love it, is she was never a fan of Elvis Presley. And she was never a fan of Elvis Presley because he incorporated Black culture. He did everything that was Black culture, but he was never there for the fight, right? He was never there during the civil rights movement. He was never there for any of it. He collected his check and he went on home. She used to always say, honey, don't be Elvis Presley. Don't hang out with your gay friends. Don't be there for them. Don't love them and then go, okay, I'm good. I'm married. I got my stuff. I'll see you later. There's a special place in hell, I think, for people like that. So I'm not saying that everybody needs to join Georgia Equality and devote their life to the cause. But a check would not be bad. But I just think it's so important to look out for someone who is not necessarily specifically entirely you. I think looking out for, I always feel that it's very important to, I think it's very important to look into yourself. I always say that it's not the oppressed, it's the oppressor who needs to do the work. Mm-hmm. I'm straight. in this scenario, I'm the oppressor. I need to do the work. And even though I come in the skin of a woman and come in the skin of a Black person, I can still be oppressive, right? So I have to understand that because I'm a cisgender heterosexual woman with a husband and a house and all of these other things, that makes me both the oppressed and oppressor. And I have to understand both of those dual identities. And in understanding that dual identity, I have to bring myself, I mean, trust me, it was difficult for me to first come to Georgia Equality because I had to keep explaining myself. Why are you here? What are you doing? You got, what's going on? So it's just very interesting because I even had to tell myself, heck, what am I doing? Why am I here? you know, but I've had to solidify myself on the fact that it is my goal and it is my role because I have benefited, unfortunately, from a society who looks at my family and my relationship and elevates it and looks at other people's families and other people's relationships and don't. So it's up to me to do the work to change that. And this is just my little piece of doing that work. Now, obviously, I could have done that for other things, but I chose Georgia Equality.
And we are the better for it. And we
I
thank
don't know.
I-
Eric, if I can add something quickly to that,
yeah.
that I don't want us to go unnoticed because of the fact that you all have called three different individuals on this Zoom, and we're three different. Generationally, we're three different generations.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we have to also be mindful that Georgia Equality seeks to continuously do, and what we've had to do, even with this strategic plan, is understand and redefine
Yeah.
our relevance within demographics and generations, because of the fact that we have to make sure that we are, how do we touch and how do we engage young individuals to get more engaged, for instance, on the C4 side with Kenyatta in politics and getting engaged in there. And we hit that out the box when we did the texting programming, and because pandemic changed that, right? And so we realized that there's so many people who have their phones, and so we had to get in treat in that way. But then you also have to be very careful not to leave out your generation, that have been seasoned, who, that they feel they're out, they're left out too. And how do you bridge that gap, and how do you create that relevance that we're not so far left that we're trying to catch all the young people that we forget about
Right.
our elders as well, and we don't keep them engaged as well, because they still matter too. And so that's been another thing that we've been very intentional about. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is our board also reflects that, because we have two individuals on our board who will tell you often we are the season crew, right? And they will let us know that. But the fact I love about that is that we are so diverse in that we're able to receive these conversations from the perspective of, who's been in the trenches for a long time and who's still trying to get their footing and learning that. And so you need both of those generations and both of those arenas to be able to kind of push this next era where we're trying to go. And so I still, I even, even though she's no longer here, I then tilt my hat, because we were talking about people who've paved the way. I tilt my hat to people like Joan Garner, who's no
Yeah.
longer with us,
Mhm.
who
Yeah.
was on the commission and paved the way. And now we have an ally like a Natalie Hall,
Mhm.
who's in her seat, who's doing that work. And so it's in those moments that you have to be grateful and honorable. You start talking about allies, you're talking about where we're moving and bridging those generational gaps. I think we're trying our best to kind of forge that relationship, as we move on, including the strategic plan.
Yeah, Joan Garner was a phenomenal person. Definitely remember her. The other thing I want to throw out, in terms of the generational thing, or even from a person of color point of view, need to realize the cost of coming out. I think
Yeah.
in my term and so forth, there was sort of view, well, you got to be out. But they didn't understand, a lot of people didn't understand, especially from a Black perspective, how high the stakes were. For a
Mhm.
Black person to come out and be rejected by their own church and their family and so forth, they didn't see the Atlanta bars or the Atlanta gay community as a place where they could go. They could
Right.
go to and be welcome. They didn't see Pride in Piedmont Park as a place, because it wasn't always safe and welcoming. And so the stakes were a lot higher for the African American community, to come out, because you risk them totally being alienated and so forth. And some of those people now are your seniors, and so you have to respect the fact that even if they are not out, they still deserve respect, and they survived.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, none of these experiences are monolithic. you know, and so, I think there's value in all of it, right? I often talk about, my decision to come to Georgia Equality was, being like a black, gay boy raised in like a small town in South Georgia. It's important for others who like are like me now to see that, I can be out, open, do work in, a space that, has traditionally not had a lot of people that look like me, and also be a leader in that space.
Mhm.
I said, Eric, don't skate over that. You grew up in the country. Don't
I,
skate
I
over
grew up in the country.
you
Yeah,
country.
yeah,
So don't
yeah,
skate over that.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Like, don't play that small town foolishness. That wasn't a town.
10,000 folks, 10,000 people in my little
But
town.
one more quick thing. Now, for us, during that time, the churches were major, major obstacles. I don't know if that's changed now. You had Eddie Long, we had some serious, in our community, we had some serious pushback and anything from the churches. And that also kept a lot of us, on the sidelines. I don't know if that's changed or not.
I won't necessarily say. I'll say this much because being someone who's also clergy,
Right.
and that's actually one of the even reasons I even joined Georgia Equality, because of the fact I also want to help bridge those gaps. I would definitely say, expect in our community there has been growth. I will say there's been growth. There still is a ways to go. I'll say that, but there has been growth because of the fact, again, because of when you see some of the individuals who really realize that it's less about, you really have to look at the human being, look at the person, right? And we've had a lot of individuals, including my godfather, who has taken some reins, and that's a great, I have to give a great shout out to people like Reverend Timothy McDonald, who
Yeah.
actually his stand in the gap and actually said, listen, they
Yeah.
deserve, this is not it, and there have been people who have stood up. And so I do believe that it has made a significant, um, there's been significant improvement, but we still have these biases. We still have these injustices within the
Right.
community. And unfortunately, like you have said, even for somebody like me, and if I can be very transparent, I serve in a great church now, but there have been many things I've been told that I have to be very careful about, even in my own, and I've been doing this 25 years. And
Mhm.
I have to be very careful, like, just don't say this or don't do this. And I've had to experience that. And so it's sad that we still have to go through that as if it is, a us and a them.
Right.
And that's still that conversation as a us and a them. And it's a we because I'm not a them. I'm a part of a we community. And so we still have a ways to go, but it is our job, and it's our job to continue to put the narrative out there and educate them well, educate them on the narrative, so they don't have any, so they can't necessarily use anything, but just continue to educate. And as long as we continue to educate, I think we'll grow. I think that's the best we can do at this current moment.
And
Mhm.
I just want to add that there are some wonderful and have been some really great affirming Black churches that have stood with us all along the way. And so
Yeah.
I also want to make sure that we celebrate and acknowledge that as well. I think sometimes we are very critical of the Black church
Mhm.
without also talking about the value that the faith community has had, for some of us, through the movement. So I just want to acknowledge
And I
that.
think having Kim Jackson now in the Senate,
Yeah.
Yeah,
continues to push that conversation. And I think she's going to have a voice, that's going to bring, I think it's going to really help change the trajectory of some people's minds, right? And so having her there, I think is going to be absolutely amazing.
absolutely. So I have one final question for you. So as a former member, you not only served on the board of Georgia Equality, but you also served on the board of the Equality Federation.
Mhm.
Um, what can the sort of broader national LGBTQ movement do better around addressing issues of racial equity, gender equity, and equity related to geography?
I think I think they have to have intentionality and be willing to change their structures, to change their processes to be more inclusive. A lot of people think all we have to do is just open the doors. But if the house was not designed for people of color, just open the doors doesn't work. If you get in the house and the house was not designed for you, and and you're uncomfortable and so forth, you don't stay. So for example, with the Equality Federation, their past practice where board members were state directors, and they realized that they wanted diversity in the board. They created another category, board member at large, so that you didn't have to be a state director because the state directors were not people of color. And if they were going to wait on that to change, they would still be waiting. So you have to be willing to change your criteria and so forth, and do not think that is lowering the quality. You're just opening the doors and you're being more inclusive. So national organizations need to understand that they have to look in the, as a Kenyatta said, the oppressors have to be willing to change. It's not the change is always on the outside person. So I think the organizations have to be willing to change their own process and their own structures, and because it is systemic, the racism, the sexism, the transphobia, all that is so systemic that they don't even know, they don't even think about it because they just breathe it every day.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're, maybe starting to see a shift in that, you look at, Quality Federation now has, an executive director that is a person of color. HRC, we now, have Alfonso David there. And so, maybe some of the wave is beginning to change.
Well, I just want to say, with the Equality Federation, because it's a federation, it's a combination of statewide organizations, and so you have a real range of cultures. I just got off the board after 4 years of Equality Michigan. Equality Michigan, racial equity is a word that they wouldn't even understand. They're trying to embrace diversity, and so people are all at different places. So,
Ronald, say that again. I think that's an important message and an important differentiation.
So I spent 4 years on the board of Equality Michigan. I'm in my hometown of Detroit, and Detroit, just like Atlanta, is the engine for the state, the African American community, and so forth. But when I first realized I was coming home, the Equality, and I looked into Equality Michigan, the board was all white. And they're actually, at that time, their office was actually in the city of Detroit. Detroit is 82% Black. To have your office in Detroit and all white board, that takes focus, that takes energy. And so I just kind of blew it off. They got a new ED and she came after me and I joined, so like that. But again, so Equality Michigan is not where it can be, it should be. I think they're going to be changing, but 4 years I was moving on. But you have other states like Ohio, you have other states like Florida and Georgia, but that are are much further along the continuum. So we're all over the place. So don't look at where you are now, and obviously think everybody's in different places.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I like that you said was, really the difference between, seeking diversity
Right.
versus seeking for there to be racial equity and a racial equity lens. And those are two very different things. And so
very, very different.
So I appreciate you lifting that up for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, this conversation has been fun, but I know that I can't hold y'all here for too long. And so I'm gonna have one final question, each of you to answer. And so, right now we are in really unique times. What makes you hopeful about where the LGBTQ movement is going? And Kenyatta, I'll let you start us out.
What makes me hopeful is intersectionality, is that people are coming as their whole selves. People are not just, okay, I'm Georgia Equality, so I'm LGBT. Okay, so I'm NAACP, so I'm Black. Okay, people are coming together. I look at a lot of the racial protests, And it was a rainbow of every group, every generation, everybody who came out and said, this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen in our country. Not because I am Black or Hispanic, but because I'm an American, I'm a human being, and this is wrong. So more of that is always what I'd like to see. And actually piggyback a little bit on what Ronald said, when we talk about diversity and equity, diversity makes you feel good. Equity makes the organization good. So diversity is me saying, oh, look, I have a Black person, a Hispanic person, a trans person. We have diversity. Equity means that all these people are able to come to the table and have an equal voice. And that's what we're really striving for. So I just wanted to elevate the diversity, equity, because I think it's so important that people hear that over and over and over again.
Absolutely. We need to put that on a t-shirt and, don't be Elvis.
Don't
Like,
be Elvis.
Yeah, that's
those
a
are
good
the
one.
things that I
Yeah.
want
Don't
like,
be
on a
Elvis.
shirt now.
That's a good one.
Ronald, what makes you hopeful?
I think the younger generation, I think they're growing up with a very different mindset than, of course, my generation, and even afterwards. I think that that they, because people are coming out. When people come out, that reduces so much of the stigma. So people coming out in junior high school and high school, so that are creating a whole new class of allies. And so I think the younger generation is giving me hope, and as well as the people who make the laws, at the White House. I mean, to see the White House with the rainbow colors, to have a president talk about gender, transphobia and so forth, that plants seeds in kids' minds all across the country. And I'll just close with this. I remember I think probably a 15-year-old going to the Detroit Public Library, and I looked up homosexuality in the card catalog. It said deviancy, see abnormal psychology. Well, that's what I was. You go to the library for the facts. There was no Ellen on TV. There was no Will and Grace. There was nothing else to affirm me. And there's still 15-year-olds who get that message, and suicide rates are high and so forth. But there are so much more options. There's so much more messaging out there than there ever was before.
Absolutely. DeAndre.
I think it's a combination of something that Ronald and Kenyatta both said. I think I'm hopeful at the fact that we have a blueprint from those who've come before us to kind of kind of set our tone. But I think at the same time, we have enough young people who also hunger for knowledge and education to try to find more, and are not afraid of it. I just kind of, the quote that always runs back to me is Bayard Rustin, who said, "To be afraid is to behave as if the truth is not true." Right? We our goal and what we strive for at the end of the day is to push truth. And I think that we are sitting literally in a good time for us. We're now getting more individuals to see truth and see it holistically. They're not seeing it as a disease. It's not seeing it, it's not something I'm trying to get away. Now, there's still some of those we still are trying to fight with, but you have things like the House who has passed, Equality Act, and as Kenyatta was saying earlier, hearing representatives speak from the floor and talk about the work that we're doing here. The fact that we were able to push and change and send two senators to Georgia. The fact that we were able to get more people engaged and excited about the electoral process and hearing their rights. The fact that we have more people who see us not as a stigma or stigmatism, but now as a cause that needs more awakening. People need to hear us, and people need to see it more. So I'm encouraged by the voices. I think that for most, if anything, I'm encouraged by the voices, those who felt that they were unheard, and those who have served as the megaphones for social justice for those who haven't been able to be heard for them. So I'm encouraged by our voices and our blueprint.
I think that's a great way to end this conversation. Thank all three of you for joining us tonight. Um, Check out Georgia Equality online. The work that we do here, is really important. So if you are so compelled to donate to the organization tonight, please do. We have a link here in the chat for folks who like to donate. And we hope to see you around as we continue to have conversations with you about the work that we're doing here. And good night.
Good night.